return to their ancestral home should they so desire and live in peace and harmony. It's not about plebiscites. The reality is there are more Muslims in India than there are in Pakistan. India is a secular country that preserves the rights of all minorities, and that's the key point here, that protecting religious minorities, protecting people who've lived in areas literally for thousands of years and trace their roots back many thousands of years, should be allowed to live in peace and harmony. They should be secure, and they should live within a security area where they can feel free to carry on the commerce. And the reality is, in the Kashmir Valley, it's a beautiful part of the world. The opportunities for tourism, for cultural exchange, for greater growth in industry, for jobs and proper security is there. If only people woke up to the fact of making the borders secure and having the opportunity for the population to live in peace and harmony and not be disrupted by terrorists. Who are causing no end of problems, the security problems, and of course then a lack of investment. Tourists won't go there for fear of the terrorist activities, and everyone suffers as a result, and that cannot be acceptable.
Yes, so I work on the Pakistan military and its interference in civilian affairs, and today I'm basically going to try and assess Pakistan's half-hearted attempts at counter-terrorism and try to analyze the fact that Pakistan's military and other leaders have claimed that they are targeting terrorists, good and bad terrorists, because they make that distinction between good and bad terrorists, and that they're targeting all terrorists invariably. I don't think that's true. I think Pakistan's military still continues to make those differentiations. By good terrorists, they mean people who attack India and Afghanistan. By bad terrorists, they mean those who attack the Pakistan army. And I think that fundamental contradiction in Pakistan's counterterrorism policy is the problem here. Thank you.
Dr. Shah, as a suggestion or what resolution, what solution or what recommendation would you say to bring this problem to an end? What would be your comments?
Well, I think the international community should support civil society in Pakistan, civilian governance, and I think that's the way forward. Civilian governments have tried several times to open dialogue, for instance, for its arch rival India, but it's the military that has been the kind of spoiler in this game. So my recommendation would be to India, to other international actors, is to reach out to Pakistani civil society and civilian institutions and build ties with them, deepen ties with them, so we can all tackle the problem of terrorism, at least in the long run. Short-term remedies don't usually work. We really have to change the kind of paradigm of how the Pakistani military thinks about terrorism in India. And I think with civilian governance and hopefully some kind of managed solution, mutually agreed solution or agreement between India and Pakistan would be another key plank of this, the opportunity that we can have to bring peace to the subcontinent.
To bring this problem to an end.
I think if we were going to do it, it would be, as was suggested by another panelist, that the Pakistani military has to be less looked at as part of the solution and as a partner, and more as an adversary and something to be limited in the region. And in Afghanistan, the idea that we can or should or might be able to in the near future leave and let it go again after we did in 1989, I think that would be the main lesson to take away.
Thank you for coming back promptly. We have two more very distinguished speakers and slightly less time than we hoped for, but we will get through it and we'll have time for discussion afterwards. Our next speaker is Dr. Akhil Shah, who is a political scientist and a professor of South Asian politics in the Department of International Area Studies in the University of Oklahoma. He's also a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. His research interests include democratic transitions, military coups, institutional norms, and South Asian security issues. His work has appeared in many journals. Like Christine Fair, he's the author of a book on the Pakistan Army. Here you are. Called The Army and Democracy, Military Politics in Pakistan, published, like Christine Fair's book, in 2014. So I'm sure you're in hot competition. Dr. Shah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Democracy Forum, for inviting me. I take off with the point that was raised earlier on by one of the Pakistani journalists on the role of civilians. As they say, with all due respect to pigs, there are military pigs and there are civilian pigs. But I'm going to focus on the military. So I am not making the distinction here, but I think that it's important to understand how the Pakistan military thinks, what its policies are, and why is it that it rarely ever self-evaluates itself. First of all, the question that I asked was Pakistan's counterterrorism policy the same as it ever was? The answer is of course. And let me disabuse anyone who thinks that the Pakistan army is fighting terrorism. Pakistan's army is fighting a few terrorist groups with a few minor modification in tactics like Zarbayaz. A couple of years ago, it became common knowledge, conventional wisdom, that the Pakistan army had really reoriented how it perceived its threat environment, and that internal security or the internal threat had become primary. That's just hogwash, I think, because if you look at some of the literature produced by the Pakistan army, which is openly available, there's really no acknowledgement that Pakistan is actually facing new threats. India is still the enemy number one. The existential threat that they counter from groups like the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is perceived as India's proxies. India is supposed to be destabilizing Afghanistan through mythical 46 or 56 consulates on the border with Afghanistan. So basically, the idea is everything is being externalized, and the perception is that Pakistan's enemies are using its instabilities to implode it from within, because Pakistan is a Muslim country with a bomb. And so how do you deal with it? It's still very much asymmetric warfare, in other words, jihadi proxies. As we all know, Pakistan's army differentiates between the good terrorists and the bad terrorists. But I think there's a deeper policy. If you have seen the film by Sergio Leone, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So there is the good, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Haqqani Network, Afghan Taliban, who actually enjoy the privileges of what you could call like a platinum frequent flyer program. By the way they freely roam around Pakistan, the way they are openly conducting their business, the way they're collecting funds. Then there is the bad guys, some misguided brothers like Hafiz Gul Bahadur and Mullah Nazir types, who can be brought into the fold and convinced that they should turn their guns on Afghanistan or on the NATO troops, but away from the Pakistan army. And then there are, of course, the uglies. And the uglies, which sections of the TTP that are irreconcilable. And there is no acknowledgement or even an attempt at redressal of this blowback from this policy. Not to mention any acknowledgement of the operational links, the ideological overlap, and the mutual manpower supplies that these good and bad and ugly terrorists share. Why is it still drawing this distinction despite the fact that Pakistan has suffered enormously? Whatever the estimates are, 40,000 civilians have died. 40,000 civilians and military security personnel have died. The military's logic, unfortunately shared by many in Washington and other areas, is that we cannot take on this hydra-headed monster of militancy because the danger is that they will unite against us, and hence we need to do this step by step. Well, again, sorry to say, this is misleading and self-serving hogwash once again. Nobody's asking the Pakistan military to roll their tanks and attack Muridke. The least the Pakistani state could do is stop people like Hafiz Saeed from spewing, inciting violence, spewing hatred against India and Pakistan's minorities. That's the least they can do. We can go blue in the face, recalling history of when terrorism started and who started it. But let me remind everyone that Pakistan is, like all other states, under international obligations. Under Security Council Resolution 1373, September 2001, Pakistan is to refrain from providing any support, active or passive, to terrorist acts, deny safe havens and not provide safe havens, prevent those who finance, plan, facilitate, or commit terrorist acts from using Pakistani territory. So that's the kind of least responsibility that Pakistan has towards the international community that it has to fulfill. Let me now turn to Zarb-e-Az. I mean, there have been claims that the Pakistan Army has basically cleared the area, as they call it, destroyed the TTP sanctuaries. But we also have to remember that operation displaced hundreds of thousands of people. And I was in Banu, where these refugee camps are recently, and these people live in abject misery, abandoned by the state. In the dead of winter, they have no wood to burn, they have no heating, they're living in, and they were promised a lot of aid by the United States and by Pakistan. That's their deep disappointment. Anyway, but Pakistan is yet to capture or kill a senior TTP commander. All of Pakistan's enemy number ones have been killed in drone strikes. That's a fact that usually gets swept under the carpet. And this is really like that game whack-a-mole. You see, you take an operation once somewhere, and then the mole arises out of somewhere else. And so the TTP has basically moved across the border in Afghanistan, and from where they're allegedly continuing to plan terrorist attacks. However, there's no way of accurately assessing what's going on in North Waziristan. You really have to take the military's word for it. There is no media access, no independent researcher can even step within 200 miles of North Waziristan, so we really don't know what's actually going on. We have to accept what the military is telling us, and the military obviously has a vested interest in underestimating its own losses and overestimating the losses of the Taliban. What does this mean for our neighbors? Afghanistan, for instance. You know, this is akin to an arsonist who thinks that he can burn down the houses of his neighbors, but his own house will always be safe. Pakistan's army now is claiming that Afghanistan is exporting terror to Afghanistan, and that it's not doing enough to stop terror attacks on Pakistani territory. I don't know if that's true or not. But let me just point you to a tweet by Pakistan's, oh sorry, not Pakistan, I mean the military's ambassador to the United Nations, who tweeted yesterday, Maliha Lodi, I quote, "I asked Afghan government to halt its belligerent rhetoric. This is in the long run in the interest of the country, it's also in the region's interest." This is like punching somebody in the face over and over and then telling them that it's in their interest to shut up. Now let me quickly go over the so-called National Action Plan. Some have called it the napping plan, others have called it the no action plan. So NAP, which was formulated in 2015, commits Pakistan's government to preventing armed militias from operating in the country, strengthening the civilian National Counter-Terrorism Authority, tackling terrorist financing, regulating madrasas, cracking down on hate speech, creating a special counter-terrorism force, and reforming the criminal justice system. All very noble goals, but with the exception of the extrajudicial killings of some sectarian leaders in the Punjab, there really is no strategy or plan for dealing with the theme park or the zoo of terrorists that Pakistan is hosting. What NAP is a hurriedly crafted laundry list designed to assuage public scrutiny from the military's failures in containing terrorism, while ironically empowering at the same time to exercise almost complete control over internal security and counterterrorism. From intelligence gathering to policing to punishing suspects in military courts. I'll just give you one example. In Sindh, for instance, the military has established what are known as the APEX committees to coordinate counterterrorism. Now, the APEX committee is supposed to have civilian and military participation, but that's just a fiction, because each of the three sub-APEX committees in Sindh, in Sakhar, Hyderabad, and Karachi are all headed by military commander. My point is that Pakistan's counterterrorism policy, if there is a policy, has been deeply militarized. And this militarization is hurting civilian governance and the rule of law, and that it's benefiting the terrorists. I know Pakistani civilian intelligence and police officials who have arrested terrorists and who have then gotten calls from our friends in the ISI saying, this is our guy, let him go. So, and this idea that the NAP or the National Action Plan or Pakistan's counterterrorism policy is somehow not succeeding because the civilians are weak and they're corrupt and incompetent and inefficient is also BS, because What the army wants to do is, it wants the civilian institutions from which it has basically taken away all the resources that they have. They want them to take responsibility for the actions, for the implementation of NAP, but without any participation in the decision making. And that's the real problem here. No matter, even if you had a national counterterrorism strategy sent from heaven, it would still be subject to the fundamental contradiction here. Unless Pakistan seriously decides that terrorists of all forms are a threat to Pakistan, if not to anyone else, because of their links, I really don't see any hope. I just want to also point out what's going on in Sindh. You know, the army has a hammer, and every politician looks like a nail. They have turned their guns on the Mahajar Qaumi movement. To them, the banned sectarian Ahl Sunnat wal Jamaat is less of a threat than for all its violence, MQM is more of a problem. So you have all manner of terrorist groups openly collecting funds, and I've seen the videos, outside mosques. There is no action against them. Farooq Sattar, who is the leader of the MQM, is a bigger threat to the Pakistani state than Maulana Ludhianvi. And that's what's really baffling to me. And the army at one point, or probably still does, wants to extend this operation from Karachi to the entire province, which would basically mean parallel government, and it would seriously undermine whatever notion of provincial autonomy we have under the 18th Amendment. It has already done so. The Rangers have actually arrested petty government officials for corruption in Larkana, in the Bhutto's political heartland. So kind of coming back to my earlier point, at the heart of all this lies Pakistan's civil military pathologies. And I respectfully disagree with Christine. There is a civilian Pakistan. That civilian Pakistan has been hammered, badgered, and injured. And, you know, civilians have had their share of mistakes. They haven't covered themselves in glory. But we should also look at how Nawaz Sharif and Benazir Bhutto at least outwardly tried to broker peace with India and how they were sabotaged. So while there is a history of civilians kind of acquiescing or collaborating with the military, really the room to operate for civilian governments is restricted. And it's true that Nawaz Sharif, when he came to power, the current prime minister, he did want to broker peace with India. He made a few overtures. And then you had this Imran Khan on the streets of Islamabad for 6 months, along with that Canadian cartoon, what is his name, Maulana Tahir Qadri. And that was basically designed to destabilize the government, to show Nawaz Sharif as where he belonged, to his place. And so let me end on a positive note. You have Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is ruled by Taliban Khan's party, who, as somebody pointed out, made a massive donation to Madrasa Haqqaniya. This is the Oxford of terrorists, right? Or whatever you want to call it. It has a huge graduation ceremony every year on the main national highway. And it has produced the luminaries of, the big luminaries of Taliban movement, right? So KPK is ruled by Taliban Khan. Balochistan is, for all practical purposes, under army rule. And the Baloch thing, it's an occupation. And you have to really emphasize the situation of the gross human rights violations that have occurred, the bodies that have appeared in mass graves of Baloch secular nationalists. To Pakistan's army, the TTP and the Baloch secular nationalists are all the same. They're all India proxies. And they have actually, I think, decided, if you want to talk about ethnic cleansing, this is what it is. And that's created a hatred, a kind of politics of violence in Balochistan between the Baloch and other communities, between the Baloch and the Pashtun, Baloch and the Punjabis. So Balochistan is with the generals. Sindh is being overtaken by the generals. That only leaves us with Punjab, which really is, I think, the South Punjab, at least, is the den of terrorist groups. It's terror central, if you want to call it, or ground zero. But of course, the problem there is also not just that these groups enjoy public support. It's also because Pakistan's good terrorists are all based there. Smack in the middle of Lahore, in Murid Ke, is Hafiz Saeed's organization. He's a globally designated terrorist who has a $5 to $10 million bounty on his head. And he roams around Pakistan as if he is conquered God knows what. He can incite violence against Pakistan's neighbors openly without any hesitation. If I wanted to hold a rally in Islamabad, in the capital, I wouldn't be able to do it. But Hafiz Saeed can do it. So there's that. Just to conclude, Machiavelli is not my favorite philosopher, but he once said, those who can change politics lose from that change, but they have all the power. Those who want to change it, those who really want to change it and will gain from it don't have the power. Thank you.
Thank you very much, particularly for the specifics. I know there are several people in the meeting here who want to ask about Baluchistan of you and other speakers. But I would like to ask Kyle Orton first to speak, and then we have a general discussion, which I hope you will be able to take up issues with any of the speakers. Kyle Orton is Middle East Analyst and Research Fellow with the Henry Jackson Society, in collaboration with whom this meeting is being held. He is the author of Pakistan, Taliban's Author, Taliban's Victim. No question mark.
That's only the title of my presentation. I haven't written a book.
Oh, it's the title of your presentation, right, okay. Kyle Orton is a Middle East Analyst and Research Fellow with the Henry Jackson Society, particularly focused on Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Kyle studied the healthcare system for Syrian refugees in Lebanon. He's written for numerous outlets on aspects of Middle East policy and politics, including the New York Times. Kyle, over to you.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I shall try and condense because most of this has been covered. Yeah, to get slightly away from my title, it's obviously the fact that the Pakistani security establishment was at least a part author of the Taliban for, as has been said, strategic depth against India. And this was they originally had designated Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, but he had failed to take territory during the civil war in '92, and then the Taliban turned up and they were quite useful at initially recovering some convoys that had been taken by bandits, and then they were able to expand and take over most of the country. Obviously they then hosted Al-Qaeda and a number of other foreign terrorist groups, and then they were overthrown in 2001. The problem since then has metastasized, as mentioned. The Pakistani Taliban comes into existence in about 2007, and then oh, sorry, okay. Can we hear me now? Sorry, this is annoying. Yeah, so the Pakistani Taliban comes around in about 2007, and this is an internal threat to Pakistan, and there are actions against it, but they are not entirely consistent, and there's an idea that they could be brought back into the fold. But the threat now has gone on a step further, which is that some factions of the Pakistani Taliban have actually gone over to the Islamic State, which is not controllable even by Pakistan's formidable security forces. So in October 2014, you had an announcement by Shahidullah Sharid, which was that there was an Islamic State branch now operating in Afghanistan. And their leader was then appointed as Abdul Rauf Aliza, he was a former inmate at Guantanamo. Sorry, this is not working. Oh, sorry. Sorry, can you hear me? It's okay.
Typing is coming across as a sort of
it's all right. Sorry. Sorry. I'll try and condense. The point I was making was that the groups that Pakistan created eventually obviously have gotten out of its control. So from January 2015, there's been a branch of the Islamic State operating in Afghanistan, led by Hafiz Saeed Khan, he was killed in July. His deputy was Abdul Rauf Aliza, who was once held in Guantanamo Bay, but he's also since been killed. But the branch goes on, and they're operating mainly along the border with Pakistan, which is going to be a threat to them at some point. It's mostly in the Nangarhar province, but they will spread out because they keep doing it. They allow, as they have in the heartlands, they allow other groups to push back the government, which, as NATO forces are withdrawing down, the government is losing ground. And the Islamic State likes to allow other groups to push the government back, and then it moves in afterwards into the vacuum and takes over. So there is that problem. An interesting aspect of this, especially I mentioned Hekmatyar, is the Iranian influence, which is growing in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. Hekmatyar was obviously, he was one of the main mujahideen favored by Pakistan during the war with the Soviets. But after he was unable to take Kabul in the early 1990s, he fell out of favor and then was ejected from the country, and he went into exile in Iran. He's since become quite close to the Iranian government, and his movement notoriously moves in those circles. In August, there was 15 people transferred from Guantanamo. Do you remember this? And one of them was a man called Hamid al-Razak, also known as Haji Hamidullah. And he was an agent of VEVAC, or the Iranian Ministry of Security. And this has happened on a number of occasions. The Taliban now also operates training camps openly in Iran, and they have control over certain sections of that movement. At the moment, Pakistan's interests mostly align with Iran's in Afghanistan. That may not always be true. So there will be these matters to challenge in the future. As was mentioned, the Pakistani calculations on these matters haven't changed. They still see their security situation the same as it was. So you had, as late as 2008, you had the bombing of the Indian embassy in Kabul, and you've had incidents similar, including Mumbai, which is believed to have been assisted by the Pakistani state. The Pakistani Taliban hasn't confined itself to Pakistan's borders. It was responsible for the May 2010 attempt to blow up Times Square. There's every reason to suspect that as Pakistan helps various proxy groups, including the Taliban, to take more and more territory after or during the coalition drawdown, there are other groups that are going to move in and take advantage of that space. And so the security threat that we went in to solve, or apparently solve, 10 years ago, is quite likely to return to us in a different form. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, we have covered a lot of ground, 5 very interesting presentations, and we have now perhaps half an hour for further discussion. I do want to say, I mean, we are looking at a very contemporary issue, very contemporary problems, and although all contemporary problems arise from tortured and contested histories, I think none of us are going to solve the historical problems and historical contentions in a seminar like this. I think what we're all trying to look at is what can be done, what the diplomats can do, what the military can do, what our foreign policy should be, and what we can do to create a situation that can resolve some of these problems. But the problems are many, and I'm sure you all have questions relating to many of them. I would like to pick up on what Akhil Shah was saying earlier, and as I mentioned, there are people in the audience who asked particularly about Balochistan. So could I identify the speakers, the people? You were one of them, sir, and there was one other. Yes, okay. Could you, if it's on Balochistan, I'd like to cover that. Yeah?
Balochistan as well as Kashmir.
Right.
I am from a family who migrated in 1947 from Srinagar. I have studied in Balochistan from 1975 to 1982 in medical school and doctor by profession. So what I've observed there over 7 years of my stay, that the state actors were quite harsh in dealing with the Baloch people, and there was ongoing intervention by the defense agencies. But on the other hand, what I have learned from those people, they are very simple people, and they want to stay in peace. And this is what was the issue in Jammu Kashmir. And I've just spoken to quite a few of ladies here who come from Jammu or from non-Muslim background. And all of them are in agreement that we should live peacefully together. It's a foreign interventions from all sides. With due apologies, I would like to say that the first intervention that came into Pakistan was in 1958, and the evidence that has been suggested by Mr. Ayub Khan, that time president, that it was the members of the diplomatic corps from Britain and the United States who enforced him to bring about martial law while there was a civil system functioning. So I think we need to look everything into perspectives, and we cannot break away from the perspective. Similarly, the Taliban movement has been generated with the Russian intervention in Afghanistan. And at that time in point, Taliban were the blue-eyed boys of the West. Today they are very bad. So I think we should be taking rationally the things, and for promoting peace, I think we should work together to bring peace and harmony in the region. This is my humble submission.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, Balochistan was granted independence 1 or 2 days before the Pakistan was granted independence, and Balochistan was recognized as an independent state by the Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
Can we make the history brief, because it's today that we're concerned about?
Coming to that point, Balochistan is occupied land, even as a Pakistan as occupying power or occupier has a responsibility toward the people who the Pakistan has occupied. Pakistan failed to protect the Baloch right and property, life and property. Do you think that Pakistan still have a legitimacy to govern the Balochistan? And the second point, just a comment I'm trying to make. Balochistan struggle for independence is homegrown struggle. It is not foreign intervention or whatsoever. It is a desire of the people to be free and to be independent and decide their future by themselves. Thank you very much.
Yes, I mean, it's true, isn't it, that you referred to atrocities in Balochistan, the suppression of protest in Balochistan, and that goes back to Bhutto's time as well, and Ayub Khan's time. Is Balochistan still a special case in the relationship of government to the provincial electorates? I'd like to ask you both.
Oh.
No, after you.
Yes, I think they see Balochistan as a, let's call it a strategic kind of backyard, or strategically pivotal with, important natural resources like gas. And any challenges to the Pakistani kind of definition of nationalism is a threat that the military thinks is a threat and is being sponsored by India. I have no proof, but I would like the Pakistani government to be more assertive and aggressive in producing the evidence against India, because the dossiers that they've been sending around the world are not really evidence. So yes, the Balochistan has been seen as this province which has always contested Pakistani sovereignty over itself because of its historically contentious incorporation into Pakistan. Yes, there have been moments in the past when the Pakistani state attacked and tried to suppress the Baloch. But I don't think we have seen the kind of dirty war tactics that the military is using in terms of just randomly disappearing people, poets, teachers. There was the case of a book publisher, bookseller, Zahid Baloch, I believe. He's gone. And you should read the letter written by his daughter. It'll make you cry in Dawn. And the title of that the title of her blog or letter is, "Forgive me, Daddy, I'm your useless daughter." So the human dimension of this conflict is really crucial. We can't just say, well, all states use violence against groups or subnational groups that challenge their sovereignty. That doesn't really mean anything to the Baloch who's being tortured as we speak in some dungeon, in some MI or ISI or FC dungeon right as we speak. So to me, the human rights angle for which the Pakistan military intelligence agency, the Frontier Corps, which is also run by the military, de facto run by the military, have really committed gross crimes against the Baloch people with impunity. And they know they can get away with murder. So that's the problem. Yes, Balochistan is seen as a trouble spot which has resources that the Pakistani grand strategists think that everybody's out to get. But the situation is really, really horrendous. And anyone with a human conscience should really consider and look at this situation deeply and try to understand the misery and the violence and the horror that Baloch people are going through because of the Pakistani state's dirty war that they are waging, the Argentinian-style dirty war and some in Balochistan.
Now, I think...
What about on the other side as well in Kashmir? Military interventions and putting the curfew...
Can we come
Of course, but we're not discussing Kashmir right now. Absolutely.
Now,
Any state suppressing its people is wrong. I agree with you.
Thank you.
now Balochistan has the great misfortune of constituting 40% of Pakistan's land area, but only 5% of the population. And the population is scattered across a vast landmass, and much of that society is ruled by tribal chiefs who have absolute authority over the people. So it's been very underdeveloped for decades now. Per capita, Balochis get more assistance from the federal government than any other province. But it doesn't get to the people because there are so many filters along the way where the bureaucracy and there are the tribal chiefs who all take their cut. So it's been very underdeveloped. It's the poorest province in Pakistan. And there have been previous insurgencies in the mid-70s under Bhutto. That was the army went in to crack down and suppress that attempt at independence. The fact also is that Balochistan has a population of about 50% Pakhtuns. So it's, while the Baloch areas in the south, they certainly have been resisting Pakistani sovereignty over their land, but the Pashtun areas are distinct and they're closer to the Afghan border. So there are these different aspects to it, and I obviously agree with Dr. Shah that any violence against their own people is absolutely abhorrent. But nevertheless, the Pakistani state is not going to permit Balochistan to be independent. I mean, I don't think most states in the world today would hang on to territory. I mean, that is the first compulsion of most modern states. And I'm afraid we are not as civilized as to offer them a referendum on whether they want independence or not. It's not going to happen. So the best that we can hope for is some kind of negotiated settlement, greater autonomy, more development, and so forth. But thus far, there have been various attempts, I'm told, by politicians to try and talk to the militants, and so far none of these attempts have succeeded.
Dr. Fair.
May I just, I would like to contest this idea that Balochistan is underdeveloped or the state that it's in because of tribal sardars. There are 3 tribal sardars, forget the names, Bukti. They are the problem. 98% of Baloch sardars have been proxies of Pakistan. Why is there no development in their areas?
They are corrupt as well.
Exactly, yeah.
Dr. Fair, do you have a comment on Balochistan?
Yeah, I did. Actually, factually, it's not true. I mean, it's misleading to say that on a per capita basis, they get more than anyone else. The way the National Finance Award is done, it's based upon population. The problem is that Balochistan has only about 5% of the nation's population. And the population is disparately distributed. So this idea that somehow that even if they were given precisely the amount of resources based upon their percentage of population, it would not be enough because of the inefficiencies in delivering public goods to a population that is so disparately distributed. The other issue that I think is important to note is what many Baloch themselves note, is that, for example, the gas from Balochistan can be easily pumped to Punjab, but people who actually live in Balochistan don't have gas hookups. I mean, if I actually have data on this, I don't have them with me right now. The state basically forces Balochistan to sell its gas at below market prices, whereas the gas that it purchased from Sindh is substantially bought at a higher price. And I could go on at length about the ways in which the state explicitly exploits Balochistan. And unfortunately, because they are characterized as Indian agents, they're easily dismissed by ordinary Pakistanis as somehow not being true patriots. And that's if Pakistanis even know about the dirty war that's going on in Balochistan. Just going to say finally, my country has an obligation to exercise Leahy amendments to any military unit that's engaging in human rights abuses. And this includes the Army, and this includes the Frontier Corps. Yet obviously my country has engaged both of those organizations extensively, despite the fact of their human rights abuses, not only in Balochistan, but no one's talked about this. It's not clear who in the world the Pak Army is targeting in Zarbe Bakbas, as I call it, Operation Nonsense. They've displaced millions of Pashtuns. Their residences have been virtually permanently destroyed. And what does the Pakistan Army have to show for it? So I think my country needs to look very seriously at our legal obligation to sanction the Pakistan Army under Leahy for these abuses.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Because she's talked about the American example. Americans should have taken consideration of the situation in Iran when in 1953 the government of Sadek was a legitimately elected government was toppled conspiracy by CIA and MI5. American regime has been involved in changing the government of
You're bringing up the history again. We could go on all night.
She's talked about the American responsibility, so I will remind her of the American responsibility of the American regime. Now, I'd like to correct my Balochi friend. First of all, they talk about the accession of Balochistan. It needs to be said it's Khan of Kandahar, who did not want to be a part of Pakistan. The three princely states, Makran, Las Vela, Haran, they willingly became a part of Pakistan. And Pakistani government signed this